Morning all. We're going to have a look at another great selection of sacrifices, a great aesthetic experience, this time from Tigran Petrosian. Tigran Petrosian is a world champion that I've been really intrigued with, actually. Notes from Wiki. He was a Soviet Armenian Grandmaster and World Chess Champion from 1963 to 69. He was nicknamed Iron Tigran due to his almost impenetrable defensive playing style, which emphasized safety above all else. So when we look at these sacrifices, we can expect that they're not going to lead to unclear complications with a high risk of losing, because really he didn't lose much at all. Petrosian was a candidate for the World Championship on 8 occasions: 1953, 56, 59, 62, 71, 74, 77 and 1980. He won the World Championship in 1963 against Mikhail Botvinnik, successfully defended it in 1966 against Boris Spassky, and lost it in 1969 to Spassky. Thus he was the defending World Champion or a World Championship candidate in 10 consecutive 3-year cycles. He won the Soviet Championship 4 times: 1959, 61, 69 and 75. That's the USSR Championship, and I've actually checked his games there, and in those 4 championships he only lost a total of 2 games. One a brilliancy to Romanovsky, which maybe we'll check out later on the channel. Petrosian is widely known for popularizing chess in Armenia. Okay, and he's recognized in chess as the hardest player to beat in the history of chess, according to certain authors. So this selection of sacrifices is in historical order. We're going to go back to 1945, when he was about 16 years old. He was born 1929. So in this position, Tigran is playing with the black pieces, and white has just played g4. Tigran is a great fan of sacrificing the exchange, and therefore we can immediately deduce, exchange sacrifices in a lot of circumstances don't necessarily give you major losing chances, because it's a fact that he really rarely lost games. Here, what do you think black plays in this position? White's just played g4, g3 to g4. Okay, I've given you a bit of a clue already. So if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, we'll put on a kibitzer here to check things throughout this. Okay. Okay. Rook takes h3. Initially the engine was suggesting other rook moves, but now coming with this. This is the easiest way to crack white's position, really doing damage to white's position, really exerting more pressure on e3, on g4. Okay, and the engine does come to this as the correct way of playing the position, in fact, to sacrifice the exchange here. At the moment it's for 1 pawn, but the thing is, it's going downhill. There's so much pressure being exerted. It's going to be 2 pawns down pretty soon. After king d3, this e3 is now dropping. There's just so much pressure being exerted for that exchange sacrifice. Knight takes e3, rook takes. So this kind of exchange sacrifice was to become his trademark. So the very early Tigran Petrosian here in Tbilisi, 1945, playing an exchange sac. And we have these rolling pawns as well now as a side effect. So the initial phase of that was getting the pawns back, but then pawn mobility is emphasized. Bishop takes c4. Black just has a dominant position with great control here, a la Karpov. So when Karpov sacrifices, there's great control over the position. The center is dominated as well. There's great pawn mobility. It's fantastic compensation. Rook e1. It doesn't matter now that this rook is going to lead to simplification. These pawns are just crushing. And in fact, after e4, white just resigned here. They're just going to roll over white quite easily. I'm not even sure we need to demonstrate that much. Once the pawns reach the 6, that's it. f2 is going to be winning the rook. The bishop's even on the target queening square there. So let's go a year later to Leningrad. So here Tigran was playing with the white pieces against Viktor Korchnoi, and Viktor Korchnoi played this kind of Dutch stone wall and went for the attack. And we'll see this kind of vacuum of weaknesses often leads to total disasters when playing against Tigran Petrosian. Here, white is prepared to do a temporary pawn sack, energetic, with e4. and black dare not take this. His rooks are not even connected yet. So d takes, f takes. This is a real pain, this position. For example, if taking here, white has a really crushing position here if black dared to take this pawn. Just with knight takes d7, for example, because then after knight e5, the bishop is actually really embarrassed here. For example, this position is extremely embarrassing, where the bishop hasn't got any squares without allowing queen f8. For example, it's just incredibly painful, and it's only double pawns here anyway. So this e4 break, very thematic, very, very powerful. So Victor played knight f7, and he's basically rolled off the board now from this position after c takes d5, knight d takes e5, d takes. Even though white hasn't got even the dark square bishop, it's just an overwhelming position here after e takes d4, e takes. Now we see the move f4, hitting d5, weak, vulnerable pawn, blocked in bishop, infiltration point for the queen, huge positional trump cards here. Black tries to defend d5, the queen infiltrates, b6, black's hanging on with a thread here, and that thread is cut off with f takes g5, getting that huge f4 square now. If queen g5, queen takes f7. If knight takes g5, queen takes d8. So black is in serious trouble. After bishop a6, knight f4. Victor Korchnoi had enough here. He resigned. He's losing material. The queen is hit. It's trying to protect the knight. He actually had to resign here. Horrible position. A crush from that e4. So beware of anyone who tries to go for Petrosian as king and leaves a vacuum of weaknesses behind. An energetic move, busted open Victor Korchnoi's position there. You might think, well, can you attack the queen? It doesn't really help. Just take here and then take the queen. There's no real defense. It's totally busted, this position here. So our next example, again, 1946. This is in USSR 1946. Tigran is playing black here, and after b3, what would you play with black? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, and I hope at the end of this video you'll think differently, that there's another dimension of sacrifices that you might not have considered before in your own chess. So here, if there's a limitation of trying to find a mating net or anything when you're sacrificing, that's not the case. It's a positional kind of sacrifice here, which I hope you can guess if I give you 5 seconds. Okay, rook takes e4. Not only, okay, it's getting a pawn for the exchange, which is good, but also these weakened white squares around white's king don't spell a very good prospects after this position. This is okay for black. In fact, probably nearly winning. The bishop just retreats, and we set up a battery next, and those light squares are going to be fun. So white decided to play c4 here, taking his time for that. But now, instead of castling, that would be a terrible routine move, when actually white's king safety has been compromised, and the queen is sitting on h2, the rook potentially on h2. So we see the move h6, trying to rip open things, and maybe d5 later. g6. Now f5, not accepting this pawn. I think that's better. If this pawn is taken, then actually this isn't so clear after knight c3. When we sacrifice the exchange, we want to also increase central control. With this pawn capturing away from the centre, there's no way of getting loads of pawns in the centre. So Tigran avoids that, strengthens his central grip. Knight c3, and this is much more powerful now, knight f6. With a pawn coming to the centre, bishop takes, f takes. And with these central pawns comes pawn mobility. And we see that immediately now after rook a1, d5. So taking control of the position, a la Karpov, the sacrifice, the exchange sacrifice. We've got potential pressure here still. Okay, this rook hasn't been activated. C takes, E takes, not yet. F5. So we've got a diagonal here to attack potentially. D4, bishop F4. Queen C8. Now this pawn is weak. Knight E2. Queen takes F5. Black has totally taken control of the centre. This pawn is also weak now. Bishop G3, attacking the queen. Queen takes G6. Huge threats now in the position for black. Knight f4, queen f7, a temporary inconvenience. Okay, queen c2, g5, driving white's pieces back. after 92, d3, winning material. White resigns here. He doesn't want to play this position on. Where could the knight have gone? If it goes to h3, then queen e6. This is pretty nasty. For example, like this, e3, and we see that diagonal opening up menacingly against white's king. That would be a mate in 3 there. So fantastic initial exchange sack. What did it really do? What can we learn from our own games? It really maximized control of the position through central control. Even just one pawn for the exchange, it compromised also white's king safety. And it encouraged white to further weaken his other pawns with that g6 later. It didn't really help. So a crushing positional exchange sack from the early Tigran. He's only about 17 now, in 1946. Now let's go forward a few years to 1951. Tigran Petrosian is playing with the white pieces here, and he's played a torre attack. This is a system, an opening system he's been playing in quite a few games, and very, very direct play, but he's got such a good grip on the position, so it's very justified. Black really hasn't got enough counterplay at the moment going on. G6 was played, and now white played h5, and Tigran, although he's got his rook here, and it seems as though knight takes h5 is possible. Let's just test that. If knight takes h5, what would you play here if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video? Okay, queen takes h5. It's asking for it for this g file. If takes here, this is a mate in 2. Knight g takes f7 check, and then we're mating like this. So a very direct torre attack with the rook coming in. It's already looking really dangerous for black. Black plays knight d8. And now, what did Tigran play here? If given the position, you know, he can play like Tau, basically. So white to play, I'll give you 5 seconds starting from now to pause the video. Yes, we've got to strip this pawn chain. So one great way of doing that is knight takes h7. After knight takes hg, this is a really crushing attack. In fact, the queen is now threatening to come in along, as well as other things. F takes, knight takes, threatening to win lots of material with knight takes e7, as well as queen h5 also very dangerous. Bishop takes, rook takes g6, and now rook h6, huge pin there. Rook takes f4, rook takes h7, queen h5. Very well calculated. There's threats like queen g6 now. Knight f7. And in this move, the precise move was played, showing Tigran's really quite a precise calculator. Can you spot the precise move needed here? If you want a very quick mate, well, relatively quick mate, is bishop g6. Okay, black played e5, bishop takes f7, and now we're going into a mate in 3 after check, king g7. Black actually resigned now. The thing is, queen h7, king f6, queen g6 is checkmate. So it seemed like a brutal attacking game from Tigran. So this was in the Lithuanian Championship in Vilnius, 1951. He had played a torre attack and he'd switched his rook, believe it or not. So yes, he's had some very great attacking, direct attacking games. We benefit historically. We can skip all of his draws and we can just look at his wins if we're really that way inclined. So you'll see in this video actually all of these games are actually his wins. So here, Tigran Petrosian playing white against Ludek Pashman, who was actually a book author. I had one of Ludek's books on the middle game. This is in the Stockholm Interzonal, 1952. Black had just played f6 here. If I give you 5 seconds here, what would you play if you were Tigran Petrosian? To pause the video. Okay, Tigran actually played f4. Give yourself some points for queen g6. Apparently this is also strong for other reasons. It's pinning there, that pawn against d6. But f4, very interesting move. And black dare not really take this. If he took this, then f takes, and black is going down after knight f6 check. We can just take on e8, e6, and we've got things like rook f7 now on the cards. It really is a crushing position to be avoided by black. So, fearing that sort of possibility, we see bishop c7 from Ludat Pashman, and now knight g3 introduces that killer knight f5. Now the knight is taken here. Knight f5, queen f6, d takes e5, and here trying to distract the queen into some sort of fork with the knight. Well, if the queen moves here, then knight takes h6. Ouch. Where can the queen actually go here? If queen f8, then that's not very nice after h6 anyway. So we see h5, queen takes h5 is played, hitting the rook now, among other things, threatening the queen. Queen f7, queen g4, threatening knight h6 check, rook e6, parrying that, rook f3, bringing the artillery in. So where is the rook going? Rook g3, rook h3, these are dangerous. Ample compensation for the piece here. Black is stuck. If he just tries knight d7 as an example, just rook g3, this is really painful for black, actually. He tries rook g6, and now Tigran plays queen takes g6, so he doesn't mind this ending, because we've actually got pawn mobility here. So we've got a lot of pawns for the knight, 3 pawns for the knight in fact, and the move g4 is very logical, just to avalanche these pawns. Knight a6, rook d7, exploiting the fact that the knight's just come off d7, weakness of the last move. Rook d8, f5 check, rook takes g7, yet another pawn, e6, so pawn mobility combined with king safety here. Check, king f1, that is, I think, the best move, even better than king g2. Check, king e2, rook d5. Now f6, these pawns are really crashing through, and it doesn't really matter about this check. King f1, the pawns are crashing through. If rook takes e6, then the f pawn looks dangerous for f7, among other things. So here knight c5 was played. Now after rook f5, black is faced with rook h5. If he moves the rook, he resigns here. These pawns are just absolutely winning. If takes here, g takes, protecting e6, and still with huge threats like f7. So this is totally unable for the bishop and knight to do anything against this armada of pawns. And if rook takes e6, then rook h5, check, and mate. So let's go to 1952. A fantastic dynamic example there with f4. I think you'll agree in this game. So 1954, playing black against Alexander Kotov. It was a London system set up. So Kotov trying to torture Tigran with that dull London system. But now we see things really spiced up with this seemingly quick attack on white's pawn chain. d5 was played. And here Tigran just took on c3, sacrificing a whole piece for 2 pawns. d takes c6, c takes b2, rook b1. So where's the compensation here? The king is still in the center. We see knight e4 protecting that b2 pawn. Okay, so very, very serious threats now, like bishop c3 are in the position here. Bishop c3 check. Bishop d3 check. So the king's stuck in the center, having to not able to castle comfortably after king f1. Caught there. Bishop a6 now. So this is hardly a pleasant London system at the moment. There seems to be a lot of annoying things about this position. And if black can collect this pawn, that would be 3 pawns for the piece sacrifice. Knight c4, that's just taken, winning the exchange here after knight c3, nearly, if it wasn't for the pin. Queen d2, pinning the knight against the queen. But in this position, queen a4 is a real nuisance. Both these bishops are nearly loose. Okay, the queen is actually protecting this one, but this one's hit. Now, if bishop b3 was played, then check is actually good. So the bishop doesn't really want to allow that diagonal, and then we can take the rook. So the bishop stays on this sensitive diagonal. We see bishop d3 after knight takes b1, bishop takes b1. We see rook fc8, so getting this third pawn is going to be really dangerous for white. We see g3, rook takes c6, getting a third pawn, and now with ideas of rook c1 check. So king g2, rook ac8, ideas of rook c1 still, bishop h6, rook c1, very dangerous indeed this position. Bishop takes g7, and now a critical moment here. Actually, this would be a mistake. King takes g7 because we have queen takes b2 check, and it's all the advantages nearly thrown away there. So instead, we see rook takes h1, and you might think, isn't this a little bit dangerous? With that queen h6 coming up potentially after king takes h1, there's no time. Check, and black just simply takes here. We see queen h6. As though knight g5 if given like loads of time. No, that's not going to happen. Queen d1, threatening mate. g4, check, and here finishing off with rook g1 check, and white resigned here. If king f4, then we can just queen the pawn. Nothing's really happening with these pieces actually. So that was Alexander Kotov's London system. Totally destroyed there, made a wreck of. After that d5 we see that surprising move b takes c3. Okay, our next example, Tigran Petrosian was playing against Capablanca in Budapest, Hungary 1955. And there seems to be an annoying pin here. Obviously it looks out of the Nimzo engine with the double pawns, but this annoying pin is evident. Black played now rook d6. Okay, so if black can play later g5, this might help things for black. But here, a surprising move was played by Tigran. If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play here? I think the clue is in pawn mobility and tied up with king safety as well. Okay, knight takes e5 was played. This opens up the floodgates for the pawns. Queen takes e5, bishop g3. So if the queen takes on c3, we can just take that rook without penalty, much penalty here. Okay, so the queen actually went to e7. But now, instead of taking the rook, which would actually give a blockade for black here on the dark squares, no, the pawns are liberated instead. e5, forking rook and knight as well, so going to get material back as well. Rook takes f6, so white has the dangerous bishop pair and dangerous pawns here. Now we see Capablanca trying h5. If he had tried, let's say knight takes c4, I don't think this works very well. Queen a4, things are hanging here in this position. Okay, so he tries h5, and now we see h4. Bishop b7, giving up on that c4 pawn for the moment. Queen a4 in any case is played, putting pressure on black. Rook g8, rook a f1. So huge pressure on the black position for that initial knight sack. These pieces are not looking particularly good. Rook g7, another pawn advances here, d6, and we see queen d8. And here a crushing breakthrough move in this position with the queen on that back row, e6, very painful. So if taking, then rook f8 is crushing, skewering the queen to the king. So practically forcing rook takes d6. Now, in this position, white wins that exchange, and black resigned here. If he takes back here, then e takes f7, hits the queen, and this is menacing. if the queen desperately does this, then queen e8 check. Another point of the queen on a4 now for this. So yes, after bishop takes, yes, this is all over. Black resigned here. So a crushing breakthrough sacrifice initially there with knight takes e5. So a beautiful breakthrough, absolutely overwhelming Capablanca. So let's go to Moscow 1957 in our next example. So Petrosian playing black here, and he hasn't had much development, but it's a very closed position. White plays b3. Can you guess the move Tigran played in this position? This was in a team match, I think, Zenit against Spartak, Moscow 1957, Evgeny Turpakov. So Tigran playing black. If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play here? Okay, bishop g7 was played. Black really wants this b file for the attack. White takes. Okay, so a pawn for a knight. Bishop drops back, and black simply castles now to connect the rooks. Both rooks will be useful for the attack. King a1, rook f b8. So here already there's a pattern of getting the knight to c2 for checkmate. Knight b1, knight c6. So the knight's on its way, but also this diagonal is now dangerous with e5. So that's actually protected. And here the fun begins, even more fun in this position. Black to play, and the engine eventually comes up with Tigran's move after a few seconds, I might add. So black to play, 5 seconds to pause the video here. What would you play? Okay, rook takes b1, stripping white of king safety. After the check, that was why black castled to get both rooks in for the attack. And now this move, quiet but crushing. Can you spot it? 5 seconds. Pause the video. c3, so crushing. Multiple threats. Queen b4 to make on here. Knight b4 to make like this. Bishop d2. And now we see knight b4. That one. So no time to take on c3. Bishop d3. And now the final beautiful move of the game. Queen c4, threatening mate. And if that takes, then we have that knight takes c2 checkmate. So a wonderful attacking game from a very, very closed position. As I say, Tigran rarely lost, so you wouldn't expect wild, crazy positions where he's in mortal danger. But rather the sacrifices flow from very, very solid positions with very, very little risk of him ever actually losing, but just with winning chances here. And in fact, very big winning chances here after he knocked out the king safety. It's just very difficult to deal with this position. You might think queen f4 was an improvement here, by the way. Here, knight b4 is still good. Bishop d3, queen a5. This position is still good after bishop f8, where black is threatening knight takes d3 and bishop takes a3. It seems as though black's just got a free hand for white's king here. Basically, this is just gruesome. This position is getting desperate if the engine's suggesting this. We can just do all sorts. We can just take this. For example, knight takes. Yeah, it's desperate. It's all crumbling around white's king. So, closed position but winning attack, basically. Now, this next example, Tigran is playing black against Paul Karesh, 1959. This is the Bled Zagreb Belgrade Candidates Tournament. So for the World Chess Championship, b4 had just been played. Can you guess what Tigran played here? Okay, rook g3. Probably best for white is to totally ignore this rook sack. To play queen c1. Is apparently it might be just about equal from an engine point of view with brief analysis. But it was taken. So what happens now? HG. And again, white, well, it's in a difficult position now, so let's see the game continuation. Rook fd2, queen h4, threatening that mate. So the bishop now moves, and it seems that, isn't there a snag here that after check, we have a queen g1? Well, okay, let's bear that in mind in this position. If rook here, this is what was played. If check in this position, actually king f1, this would be actually lost for black. There's nothing going on here for black in this particular position because of this check and queen g1. It seems it's not quick enough to get an attack. So that's why it emphasizes the precision needed here. White's just sacrificed the rook. Precision calculation needed. Rook h7 instead. Okay, with the queen still on h4, and you might think, what on earth, after king f1, is the significance of the queen still on h4? Black to play, if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play in this position? So that was a wafer thin little finesse there with the queen not being on h2. So why would that be, you think? Black to play. 5 seconds to pause the video. Queen takes f4. That's how to play the attack. Totally deleting black's defensive resource. Let's use a database term. Deleting black's defensive resource. So queen takes, there's rook h1. Otherwise we're losing that queen. The queen is actually a loose piece here. It's not protected by anything. So we just take here. Otherwise we can either take here or rook h1. In fact, rook h1 is even better. So yeah, the initial rook sacrifice, very well calculated, with that little finesse needed, because maybe Kez was banking on this queen g1. The little tiny finesse here, rook h7, not going in for the check yet. The queen still having an influence over the f4 while it's there, which is important there. Beautiful calculation from Tigran. Now this next example, going chronologically, Tigran playing white here against Lunik Pashman, and in this position has a very, very nice position. Black seems to be tied up. Beautiful knight on c4, beautiful position generally. The bishop's hemmed in, the rooks are not connected. You can have excitement just from the positional side of things here, but rook e4 sets up some wonderful tactical ideas. And in fact, Fischer commented on this. Petrosian is preparing for a very beautiful finish. That's a Fischer quotation. So we see rook d8. Can you guess what Tigran played here? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay, queen takes f6, a beautiful move, drawing the king out. And the absolute beauty of this position after the check, king g5, is the next move, which according to Fischer is the real problem move. So 5 seconds here, what would you play in this position? Bishop g7, yes, cut the king out from h6, leaving the king to have the wrath of the other white pieces, like h4 and bishop f3. Black resigned here. If rook takes d3, apparently this is one defensive move offered by the engine. Take, and we'll see how we're going to get mated like this. g4. Yeah, the bishop is controlling these key squares for the king. Fantastic stuff. So rook e4 sets up that nasty forcing move idea. Wonderful idea, just a wonderful original conception there. Okay, now in 1961 there are actually 2 USSR championships, and this was part 1 earlier in the year, which Tigran actually won this USSR championship, and he's playing cautionary, and we see rook e7. There are some stories about, I think there's some stories about Petrosian cautionary matches with kicking under the table. I don't think, I have a suspicion they weren't the best of friends. So anyway, white to play in this position. If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play here? Okay, exchange sack time. This is a trademark exchange sack. If you can get one pawn and dominate the position, control the entire position, that's good evidence, then it's good prospects. It breaks down, black's light square control. It breaks down black's central control and occupation, literal occupation as well. C takes queen g5. The knight stops queen b7. So these pawns look to be in mortal danger. Black tried here bishop f6. One up, queen takes d5 check. 2 pawns for the exchange now. Very, very solid position. White is threatening knight takes f6, followed by bishop e5, skewering the rook against the queen. Rook against the king. Okay, wake up, sorry, pardon me. So the bishop moves back. Now knight d6 was played. White has a very dominating position in the centre here. Queen a8. And here, it might be tempting just to take the queen. I think white's okay with that. But we see queen b5. Going for a third pawn. That b6 pawn. We see queen a7. And now knight c4. And the bishop actually controls b8 here. It's also threatening a skewer with bishop d6 as well, potentially, as well as taking here, or rook d6 just to come round for that pawn. Cautionary didn't really like his position here. It does look pretty grim. He resigned actually. If rook e6 as an example, then actually there's rook d7. That's pretty good. It's very embarrassing actually. The queen hasn't got too many squares. It's almost mated. Queen a8. White could even play rook takes g7 here. This is horrible. With a king hunt implied. That's really horrible. So yeah, with good reason, I think Victor Cautionary didn't want to play on the position. He was convinced this was pretty lost after queen b5 and knight c4. Yeah, resigning here. This third pawn dropping off is really kind of bad news. So a typical exchange sack here. So getting one pawn here and then getting the second pawn, and it dominates the position, dominates the center. And also black's king safety is getting a bit shakier as well with that, the impact of that knight d6. It's just a very, very shaky position here. You might think, what about the pin? Here actually queen e6 is good. If rook d8, then knight f7 check. Horrible. We've got rook takes d7 there. So queen e6 is really horrible. We're going to win the exchange. If here, this looks desperate. Actually, the tactical knight c8 here with the king on h2 there's no checks or anything to rebound the tactics. So hitting the rook, hitting the queen. So that's another way of just being lots of material up. Okay, so Paul Cautionary seems to be, wrecked when he plays Tigran sometimes. Totally wrecked. Now, this is one of my favourites, which we've seen on the channel. Boris Spassky has got a vacuum around his king. This is in Moscow 1966. You see this vacuum? And he's just played this aggressive f4 to liberate his bishop, to get the attacking bishop. And after bishop h3, it looks very scary actually for white. Just to rule something out for you, well, what would you play here if I gave you 5 seconds to pause the video? Basically, what would you play? Alright, now, bad news if you played rook f2. This is actually pretty bad. You'd experience the wrath of Boris Spassky here with rook takes f4, knocking out that for the g5 square. So, for example, taking queen g5 check. And this is just horrendous. This position is a mate in 2. Put something in front, it's just absolutely horrendous. And the attack rages on. Sorry, not that. better is queen e7. The attack rages on. No, none of that is allowed. Knight e3, connecting rooks, and he's going to hijack these diagonals. And the video is called Hijacking Diagonals, I think, that I've done on this game on the channel. If you want to check that out, search on Petrosian. So against Spassky. So bishop takes f1. The rook takes f4 doesn't really work very well here. Takes, check. There's rook g4 in this position. So knight takes, bishop takes, takes. This position here after king h1 is good for white. There's rook g1 in prospect. Okay, so if we go back, instead of rook takes f4, bishop takes f1 was played. Rook takes. After knight g6, we see complete control of the position now being exerted after bishop g4, getting onto this diagonal to complement that beautiful queen. So we have the light squares and the dark squares all becoming under white's control. Knight takes f4. A technicality, although it protects e6. Well, how do we deal with technicalities? What would you play here? You want to control the whole position. You want to control both colour complexes. Just sack the exchange. Rook takes f4, bishop e6. Get that bishop e6 in. Rook f7. Wonderful pin from Tigran's perspective. Torture from Spassky's. Knight e4. Now, huge threats here are emerging like knight f5 and check here. Knight e4 covers that g5 square. No pesky checks from that queen. Although there is the h4 square here. The queen tries to be a nuisance with queen h4, allowing d6 to drop. That's taken, allowing this check. An inconvenience. King h1. Rook a to a7. Now Tigran takes on f7. He has a wonderful thing planned in this position. Can you spot it? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video here. Beautiful, beautiful move from my perspective. One of the most beautiful that I've ever seen on the chessboard. The whole conception before it, beautiful. How the vacuum of squares exploited. Okay? You've got 5 seconds to pause the video. Queen h8. Wow. Black resigned. If takes, knight takes, white's hugely material up in this position. So yeah, Spassky has to think twice before attacking and creating weaknesses at the same time as a downside to his attacks when playing against Petrosian. So this next example, Tigran is actually playing black against Boris Spassky in Moscow 1966, and Tigran has closed up the queen side. You see his king is very safe. Not surprising, this guy didn't lose many games, so his king safety is actually stronger than most other GMs. He's not the sort to get easily mated, and he likes these closed positions. Again, with the closed positions, there's less chaos, there's less tactical chaos, less complications to stumble and lose horribly. It's a closed position with black having great prospects here. White plays knight h2, trying to evict that rook. Can you see what Tigran played here? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video here. Okay, knight takes e5, taking out white's central control. Now here we see knight takes g4, h takes g4, undoubling the pawns. So potentially it looks as though h3 and this one will be very, very tasty. e4 now, trying to disrupt the plans here. Let's see. If black took, then actually bishop takes e5. It's horrible. Queen d8, checkmate. Nope, need to be a bit more careful than that. Bishop d6 was played, keeping things safe. Queen e3. Now, in fact, d takes might have been possible, but knight d7 was played, getting that dark square bishop off. Queen takes. Black's prospects of being mated are severely limited now. Rook d4, e5, and these pawns are looking all of a sudden a bit of a menace. And in fact, this next move emphasizes pawn mobility. So after that initial exchange sacrifice, we have an emphasis now on pawn mobility, central control, and part of that is also king safety if this bishop can be liberated as well. But what is instrumental to all this in this position, if I gave you 5 seconds to pause the video here. Okay, f5, pawn sack. Now if e takes in this position, then actually there are lots of strong moves here for black, but queen f6 keeps things going very nicely, just to take this pawn, or h3 later. It's knocking out this diagonal really, it's another barrier for that diagonal. So e takes d5 was played, at least trying to get an annoying pin against Tigran. But we see f4, queen e4, knight f6 allowing the check, king b8, f3 trying to create a wall again against this bishop, bishop c8, queen b1, trying to bring down the wall soon after g3 because there's h3 on the cards. And it seems black has forgotten about, not really cared about, white's d pawn now, all this diagonal. Attention has been switched to h3 now as a prospect. Rook e1, h3, bishop f1, rook h8. White's king seems to be much more in danger than black's king in this position. G takes, bishop takes. There's no risks for black. Petrosian is playing for a win without any risk of a loss. Trademark. King g1. Black took on f1. Now after king here, in this position, we see e4. Okay, so black dare not take with pawn. f3 looks horrible. And if he sacrifices the exchange, well, the queen is on the skewering line here after check. So that would be pretty dismal. So e4 is pretty powerful actually, in light of that. Queen d1. Now wonderful move here again, knight g4. Brilliant game, truly brilliant game. So makes way for queen h6. F takes. f3 with rook h1 immediately being threatened. Rook g2. Now Tigran just took this on g2 and white resigned here. He's faced with a forced mate technically. For example, taking here check, and in this position queen h6 is strong with this idea of rook h1. So anyway, it's here around about here that Boris Spassky resigned. Yes, he could be fiercely attacked by Tigran on occasions. I think he didn't really appreciate when Tigran Petrosian became world champion because of his style of play, that he wasn't as Spassky was more of a tournament, you know, more going to rack up the wins in tournaments, or with his attacking style of play, taking more risks. But Tigran, when he won, you know, is won without risk. Now here, against Anatoly Bykovsky in Moscow 1968, black's position already has a lot of weaknesses. Black played bishop f6, and can you see what Tigran played in this position? Okay, pretty much forced really. With the pressure on d3, you know, this looks actually like a proxy move for knight d4. No, knight takes f5, going for the king really. Bishop takes c3. And the idea is knight takes h6, just strip away the king's safety, the pawns, the skin around the king. Queen g6 check. Bishop drops back after munching that rook. Bishop takes h6. Queen h7 check. Rook takes e6 now. Things are crunching. Rook f6 to use that pin is on the cards. Rook e7 check. King e8 check, and black resigned here. If king d7, then check. For example, like this is mate, queen d6, ouch. Or here, bishop g6 is mating, really. it's the king safety is being shot to pieces. Yeah. So wonderful attacking chess after bishop f6, yes. Just to get rid of all the protection around the king. You might think, well, if e takes, this doesn't fare very well. Bishop takes, hitting the queen. And what does black do if he doesn't want to give up the queen? What does he do this? We just play check. And we can keep that rook now for the attack with rook g3 if we wanted. So threatening all sorts. Queen g6, bishop takes. It's just overwhelming attack there. Okay, so we can play very dangerous attacking chess if given the right position. This game now, Tigran Petrosian was playing black against Lev Polgiavsky. I have one of Polgiavsky's books in the laboratory for his in the lab for his opening research. He did a very distinctive variation of the Sicilian defense, very technical Polgiavsky. So anyway, here in this position, e takes f5 was played, and there's a strong move available for black. Yeah, well, there's a couple of good moves. e4 was chosen, and we see after bishop takes e4, bishop takes e4. Right, in this position, d takes, knight e f6. So white is under great pressure with this pawn now, under danger. Knight g2. Accurate move though needed now coming up after rook fe8. In this position, if white took on e3, rook takes e4 is great. So rook takes e3 and knight g4 on the cards. White actually played knight d2, and now Tigran took on d2, and great calculation here. What does black play here? 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay, queen takes g3, yes, nice one for that fork, and he's got a winning advantage here after knight takes d2. So the game continued a bit more like this. Consolidation, that pawn's really dangerous. Yep. Neither knight can be taken here because of knight f2 check. So yeah, it's all over. So yeah, from the initial position, black had done this weird looking g takes. White had tried to keep things closed and simple, but it all turns against white here. And in fact, if rook takes f5 just to keep the king things intact here against the e4, it's still better for black. Knight g7, for example, and then f5, and this is still ripped open potentially. These diagonals are dangerous. Say takes here, e4, it's all still ripped open. It's actually a very, very strong position here. This position here after knight f6. G3's a target, moves like this. E4's a nice target just to build up. So saying here, this one, this is really just a horrendous position. It seems, one of the main things about this sort of position, well, is this bishop on e3 compared to this one. It seems to be pointing at white's king. That's why this seems such a dismal position, actually. It seems both bishops are really pointing at white's king, and the centre is about to be flooded. Not very nice options for white. So Polgiavsky rolled off the board. Now this next example against Fischer. This is a game covered on the channel actually. Fischer's just played Queen E2. This is in the Fischer Petrosian candidates match, Buenos Aires 1971, which Fischer eventually won the match, but not without difficulty against Tigran. So Tigran was Fischer's last obstacle to face Boris Spassky. We see D6. Fischer had wiped out Larsen 6-0, Taimanov 6-0, but Petrosian was a tough cookie compared to those guys. D6 was played here, Queen H5, as though this is really quite dangerous, threatening mate, and E2. So this was actually allowed by Tigran. So Tigran to play in this position, what was he thinking here? Doesn't this look like a blunder to allow this position? White to play, if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video here, what would you play in this position? Okay, F4. Forget about the exchange sacrifice. Black's king is going to be weak. E2, F takes. White has the dynamic play here. E takes, rook takes. Multiple threats. Just to bring the rook back is one of them. It's target F7. Fischer takes on E5, rook F1. Forces a concession here, basically. F6 weakening the light squares. Queen B3 threatening mate. King G7. Check. And here Black's structure is eroded. D takes E7. Holding the F8 square, weakening F6. So rook takes F6 now on the cards. F5. White just takes that. It's carnage. Check. King H1. It doesn't matter the king's here. There's always rook F1 and then rook F6 later to a check. Fischer resigned here. Let's just show that. If check, rook F1, simple retreat, and then getting butchered after with this rook. So the conception there from Tigran, well, he had an overwhelming position. It was just a technicality to deal with, basically. Here, he's got a fantastic bishop and queen. The king is weak. The rooks are not connected. It's a technicality, Queen H5. How do we deal with technicalities? We have to sacrifice sometimes. F4. Let Black win the material, take the penalty. It doesn't mean much in this particular position. It really doesn't mean much after rook F1. White's pieces are all coordinated against the king. You might think if E6, this doesn't fare well to Queen D7 actually. Although it blunts the bishop temporarily. And this is analysed in detail, by the way, on if you search for the video for this year, 1971, on the channel Petrosian Fischer. This is just crushing. So this was beating Fischer at his peak in spectacular style in 1971. Okay. Or near his peak. Fischer near his peak. This next example, Petrosian against Doroshkevich. Okay, this is in Erevan's 1975. Okay, complicated position. A takes B4 had just been played. Tigran playing white. What would you do if you're Tigran Petrosian here? So you have a reputation of not losing many games at all. So how do you uphold your reputation and create winning chances at the same time? Okay, well, I'll tell you, C takes D5 doesn't actually generate many winning chances. You haven't created imbalances in the position. Apparently, from an engine point of view, this is virtually dead equal after B5. No, you want to do a trademark exchange sacrifice. Rook takes D5. After bishop takes, you want a piece on D5, not a pawn. So rook takes D5. It's not the ideal piece at the moment. You really want a knight there to torture F6. You want to win a pawn, so a pawn for the exchange. Things are looking up. Now knight G4, torturing F6 and H6 at the moment. Temporarily, that can be dealt with though with bishop G5, handling both. Better, I think, than king G7 actually. then we can gives like options. So bishop g5. Now we see rook d1 to exchange that piece with a knight on d5 to torture f6 again. Rook e8, knight d5. Black's under pressure and stumbles here. Black should have played queen g7 to keep things cozy here on h6 and f6. What he did play, and this is a big clue, is queen f7. So white play here and win material, just get a completely winning position. If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. Knight here takes f6 was played. So if takes, we have knight h6 check. Oh dear, the price of inaccuracy. So black played this, blundering back, well, blundering the exchange here, basically, and material down, horrible position. Queen b2, and black resigned here. There's actually a threat of rook takes d6 and queen e5 here, for example. But white is material up, in any case, 2 pawns up. As an example, knight d4, actually we can just snap that off, another exchange sack, just to get a crushing position here. It's all about controlling the position, really, and the piece dynamism after f6. This is really horrendous for black. Okay, our next example against Joseph Dorfman. Black had just recaptured the queen, and I hope you can guess this one. You want to generate winning chances with minimal losing chances. What would you play here? 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay, a trademark exchange sack. Bishop takes a6. It's only 1 pawn for the exchange at the moment. Sorry, after rook takes a6 now. So that dominating knight on d4. Looks like c6 is a goner. c6 goes. It's enough. It's enough to justify the sacrifice without even further calculation. These pawns have mobility. They're lost to expand. b5. I know it seemed like a dangerous pin, but it's handled here. That needed to be calculated. Now here, welcoming simplification even when you've got pawn mobility. Black might be on the verge of being annoying here with rook c4, wiping out these pawns. So white's got to be careful. An accurate punch is needed here to make white's idea triumph. What would you play here? Okay, rook a7, not giving black any time really, welcoming the exchange of rooks. If takes, then this is horrendous. You know, rook c4, we got c6 now, with b6 and b7 to follow. So rook c8, and now against addressing this concern of rook c4, we have rook d7, just hitting d5, protecting c5 potentially. Rook c4, rook takes d5. 3 pawns for the exchange. Nice. The game doesn't last too long. King f3, in fact, and black resigned. Did black have any serious threat here? Not really, in any case. Why did black resign in this position? He's just going downhill, really. It's overwhelming material for white. These pawns are eventually going to win. White's pieces are just going to improve here. Just to show an example, knight d4 is even possible because of the knight e6 checks. So these pawns are already ready to run here, tactically if nothing else. Okay, let's see another example against Nukim Rashkovsky. Now this is in 1976, and you'll feel that this looks like a Fischer Spassky, where Fischer was playing black in 1972 with those double pawns. I think, yes, it's a bit reminiscent of that. Bishop a6. White to play here, and Tigran didn't move the rook. If he moves the rook, then black actually has c4 with the idea of knight d3, and this actually could be quite annoying. For example, knight e3, knight d3, looking at this rook moves. It's just annoying, this sort of stuff. It's not really giving white that much time for an attack, although even this position might be quite dangerous. But in the game, white accelerates all of this with the light square attack, but just by sacking the exchange, rook h3. The engine doesn't like it initially, but the evaluation climbing down 0.71, 0.61, 0.55, the more it looks at this, it's climbing down. And why wouldn't it climb down? If a knight comes to f5, that's Kasparov's favourite square for a knight. Let's have a look at this. Bishop takes, knight takes. The engine suggests initially b5, but now the evaluation coming down and down here. H4 is now suggested by the engine. It doesn't really matter. Let's look at the game continuation. b5, and already white's equal after this. Knight d e3, coming to that huge f5 square. Knight f5. So if this one comes in for the attack as well, it's going to be mega dangerous. Rook takes h5. Black seems to have a dark square grip. Extinguish that grip. g3. And then now with that grip extinguished there on f4, now carrying on, knight 1 e3. a3 was played, takes, queen b6. Queen d2 now. So the queen is poised to come to h6 with this move. New trajectory for the queen to invade on the dark squares. Queen b3, knight g4, rook b7. In fact, queen f3 might be a nuisance here. If queen f3 had been played in this position, it doesn't really matter. Queen h6 there is strong. So rook b7, but king g2 extinguishes queen f3, queen c4. Now white takes Tigran, takes on e5, offering e4 here. Doesn't matter. f3. After takes, knight h6 check. So he wins the queen. That's horrible. Okay, black resigned after this move as well with his move. So Nukim Rashkovsky trying to play dynamically, but classic exchange sacrifice there. Gave white all the winning chances with minimal losing chances. Tigran Petrosian against Viktor Korchnoi. Overwhelming position already. It's a technicality to finish the position, just emphasizing some precise calculation here with this example. After queen e8, what would you play with white? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay, I hope you've given rook takes g6, because we want to use that 7th rank power. So if takes, we've got queen c3 check, mating on g7. Now, if you had taken with the other way, well, there's no other way to take it really. If you took with this way, this doesn't really work as well, for obvious reasons. So yeah, that's the way to take it. Rook takes g6 here. After queen e5, queen takes h5, checkmate. Okay, so Korchnoi, yes, was a victim on many occasions against Tigran. Now let's go to the next example. This is against John Nunn, who I've played recently, as you might be aware, a couple of times now on the 5-minute auto pairing ICC. So John Nunn in 1978, Hastings 1978. And in fact, I've played through the games of Tigran against the British players. His wins were very, very convincing. No counterplay given to his opponents, like Tisdall and others. No counterplay. Beautiful games to look at. Now here, John Nunn plays rook b4. What does Tigran play here? It looks as though John Nunn has some ideas, like queen takes d5, like bishop takes b2, or rook takes b2. What would you play here with white? You're a former world champion, world chess champion. You're playing against an up-and-coming, dynamic, aggressive Grandmaster John Nunn. How would you squash John Nunn's counterplay? So you could say counterplay none after this next move. If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, starting from now, what would you play? Okay, b3. The engine loves this move, offering an exchange like this. If queen takes d5, let's examine this for a moment. Rook c1. The rook's kind of looking awkward, actually. And there's a sensitivity on this diagonal to address with bishop e2, bishop f3. So say knight c6, bishop e2. This is annoying for bishop f3. And white has a dominating position here. So John Nunn actually took this rook with bishop takes a1. So queen takes a1. Okay, so what's the point? Well, queen takes d5 now. a3. Possibly black's best is actually to play rook takes b3 to counter sack the exchange. It's the engine suggesting rook takes b3 here. John Nunn preserves the rook, maybe at great cost with rook g4, bishop e2, dual threats, bishop f3 now to skewer. Knight c6, offering the exchange like that. It wasn't taken here. If it is taken here, maybe this is the point. Black's actually doing quite well after takes. White can't castle because of the knight hanging. So we see bishop f3. Can the queen really keep hold of the attack on d2? Let's have a quick look at d7. White can just castle now because c6 is an issue. So it goes to e6. And now we see bishop takes g4. White castles. So at the moment, material is level, but black has weaknesses. And Tigran is very good at exploiting a vacuum of weaknesses around the king. f3, knight e4, hitting c5, as well as introducing knight f6 check. Rook d8, and knight takes c5, queen takes e3, bishop f2, queen e7. White stands batter, and this is what happened. h4 now, knight e4. It just seems unfortunate, black's position without the fianchettoed bishop, as though it's been robbed of a right to safety without that bishop. So check b4, highlighting now bishop c5 as a horrible pin on the cards. In this position, bishop c5 is actually strong. Knight takes h5 was played. G takes, check, bishop c5 check here, and now queen e5, the final move of the game. Horrible pin. John Nunn resigned. Yes, I think there wasn't, the way Tigran played it after b3 was courageous. This initial courageous sacrifice you might not have seen before. It's quite a long game continuation after. I hope you excuse that. I just wanted to demonstrate something about the exchange sack here for the dark squares, for the exploitation of weaknesses. Doesn't that remind you of that diagonal of the game against Spassky with the queen h8 earlier in Tigran's career? So okay, so 1983 now for our next example and final example. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I really enjoyed going over his games as part of preparing this video. I looked at all of his games in the USSR Championships, which he had won, 4 of them, only 2 losses. Really impressive player, but I would have hated to have video annotated all of his draws. It's more fun for me to look at the wins. So here, Tigran Petrosian is playing black. Lev Polgiavsky, again, an old friend, Moscow Championship 1983, plays bishop e3. Guess what black plays here? I hope you can guess by now. Trademark. 5 seconds. Trademark exchange sack. Rook takes e3. After f takes, nice blockade potential. Simply blockade, knight c5. No rush to win material, no rush to prove this in terms of mating or winning material. You might think, well, queen c5, is there a rush to prove this? Why would you want to do that? The rook takes b7 anyway. No, just to blockade. We can torture this pawn at leisure. Start torturing it now, at leisure, under our own circumstances where we're protecting b7 very solidly, thanks very much. We've got our attack without having to defend anything. Everything's defended. We can torture more now. Bishop h6, queen e7, torture of the e3 pawn, causing a huge blunder here. White plays rook b6, and Tigran plays knight a4, forking queen and rook. It was a miserable position anyway. White resign here. White's under great pressure. If he plays let's give a move, rook b1. There's enough for the exchange. Even if we don't take the pawn here, we could even play queen e4 and be better. There's just no risk of actually losing here, and this is a fundamental thing about Tigran. There's no risk of losing in this sort of position with this exchange sack. Black dominates the center, the e-file pressure and everything. So I hope you got something out of this. It's a new style of sacrificing when we add this to our series, that each player has their own agenda for the sacrifices. It reflects on their style of play. In Tigran's case, I think there's a lot of exchange sacrifices which generate winning chances with minimal losing chances. I think that's the very key thing about it. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.